Greetings, and welcome to my channel. This is Sorcerer Tal. You can also find me online at sorcerersguild.com, as well as on Facebook at the Sorcerers Guild. Today, we are going to be continuing my fictional work, Anarchy's Last Stand, and continue reading from the novella, the Fayrune Saga. For those of you that are getting tired of my fictional works, after this novella, there will just be a few more short stories, and then we will get into the poetry and essays that are included in this book. And of course, we will maintain our regular programming every Saturday with episodes of magical theory, experimental magic, and many of the other playlists that I have created over the years. Okay, so today we are going to continue with the Fayrune Saga, and we're going to be picking up with Coda entering the City of Trees. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get started. Okay, the City of Trees. The trees that made up the City of Trees were ancient, even before the Horde had arrived amongst their branches. The massive redwoods that held the intricate rope and bonewood-walled houses had stood for long beyond the memory of even the most ancient wizards. Coda arrived at the City of Trees in the late hours of mid-morning, just as the mists from the sacred ocean made its final drift away from the long needled leaves of the massive redwoods that held an entire city aloft, based along the mouth of the Minigitsu River. The city was originally created when members of the Foresters Guild began building several large mills on the side of the river to provide better irrigation to the already massive ancient redwoods that grew on the lower reaches of the Minigitsu River. Soon, members of the Crafters Guild began utilizing these large mills to grind bone, wood, and cartilage into the Fayrune composite material, so sought after throughout all of Meadow Valley. Coda arrived at the City of Trees with a good crowd already behind him. Many young Fayrune of his coven had announced intent to join the Warriors and Dasters Guild immediately upon hearing of their coven sister's fate by far-off primitive humans. And as Coda continued his 3-day journey, news spread with many young Fayrune joining up with every coven they passed. By the time Coda had reached the City of Trees, runners had already been sent in every direction and to the location of every known Fayrune coven. Thousands had arrived, and many more were expected. It seemed to Coda that a vote for war was assured. End scene. Stormcrow watched the commotion of the hero's arrival through a bonewood telescope. So this was Coda, the guiltless Fayrune that earned his fame behind a dog. Well, his features were good. Much of the elder race showed through his face. His ears were pointed with no scars to denote the increasingly common infant surgery. When he smiled, his teeth flashed ivory white and sharp like the demons of old. She could not see his hands well, but from how he held them, it looked as if maybe one or two of his fingers had even retained retractable claws. Only his nose was flawed, coming down in two round, slightly upturned holes, like that of men. No wonder he needed the dog, Stormcrow mused to herself as she pulled the long telescope from her eyes and retrieved a small book of parchment and a quill, preloaded with ash and squid ink. Stormcrow brushed one of the many long, thin black braids of her hair out of her face as she leaned down towards the parchment. The small shell beads interlaced in the braids clacked and jaggled against each other as her hair moved. She wrote the message quickly and sliced the page from the book with slow precision, using her one retractable claw that extended from the first finger of her dominant left hand. After rolling the parchment into a cylindrical scroll, she tied a bit of red thread around the scroll to hold it closed, careful to leave a long loop on the top for her crow, Simon, to hold. Then she whistled 2 short, quick chirps, and Simon hopped from his perch behind her and reached his long black crow's beak into the tied loop at the end of the tiny scroll. Take this message to the inn, and see that old man receives it personally. Someone has to talk some sense into these fools before the whole continent goes off to war. Simon flapped his black wings, rising up from the table, and perched himself on the sills of the open window, looking down through the branches at the commotion on the street below. The inn was towards the river. The old man would be there. He was always there. End scene. Simon flew through the air, gliding lazily towards the Minnegichi River. It would be a short flight, as Simon's and Stormcrow's nest was only a few trees from the river itself. Simon was taking his time, enjoying the sights and sounds of the impromptu festival below. He was tempted to divert his course a bit, to get a look at this coda himself. Simon knew Stormcrow would argue against war. Simon hoped they would go anyways. It had been a long time since Simon had felt the strong winds of the open ocean beneath his wings. Simon loved the salt breeze even more. He enjoyed coasting on the trade winds, watching for ships and leading Stormcrow and her shipmates to their plunder. His own spoils he found floating in the wreckage often weren't bad either. A good war somewhere far, far away. That's what Simon needed. Despite her reluctance, Simon was sure some time on the high seas again would do Stormcrow some good as well. Simon turned down the coast of the Minnegichi River and began making his descent towards the inn. The inn, there are some asterisks here, so technically end scene. The inn, despite its humble name, was considered by many a place of wonder. Over 600 feet tall from the base of the tree at its center to the tops of its highest branches, highly polished bonewood scaffolding starting out from the base of the massive redwood propped up living walls of woven vines, forming the rooms and hallways of the inn. The bonewood scaffolding rose up through the branches of the trees like interlocking lace. Ivy woven like fabric created rooms and hallways amongst the branches. The top rooms, only visible at midday when noon sun finally melts away the morning mists. This ancient and noble structure is the social heart of the City of Trees, as is the inn in any Fayrune city. Old Man was in his room reading a stock list of spices when Simon appeared at his window, tapping lightly on the bonewood scaffolding of the window frame. "Come in, Simon," Old Man said, motioning with his hands for the crow to enter. Simon hopped up fully onto the windowsill and flew through the room and landed on Old Man's knee, extending his beak forward to offer Old Man the tiny scroll. Old Man sat down the spiral parchment ledger in which he had been reading the spice tallies, and slipped the loop off of Simon's beak and set the scroll off to one side. With his other hand, he reached forward and began stroking the back of the small black crow's head. "I think I already know what your friend wants, little fellow. More important to me at the moment is you. I take pride in knowing that no citizen of the City of Trees enters the inn and leaves without having something to eat. Now, I don't know if crows like dried fish." Simon flapped his wings excitedly, flying high up into the air and coming down quickly on the edge of Old Man's desk on the other side of the room. Old Man's lips parted in a suppressed grin, and Simon and Old Man repeated this same ritual every time Simon came to visit him. He kept a pouch of dried mackerel bits in his desk drawer for his small feathered friend, who visited occasionally, sometimes on errands, but sometimes simply for the fish. Old Man opened the desk drawer and pulled out a long, salty piece of dried fish and held it out to Simon. Simon's long, black beak snapped up the fish and pinned it on the desk under one foot and began happily pulling away bits of the meat, as Old Man sat down upon the ledge of his bed and unrolled the tiny scroll of parchment. It was as much as he suspected. Stormcrow was sending advance notice that she would attend the council to be held tonight at the inn's meeting hall. Any named Fayrune was welcome at council. If Stormcrow was sending advance notice, it meant she was using one of the 3 times in her life that she could claim the right of hero, and be seated at the final council by this right. Old Man knew if that was the case, then she intended to speak at council with a view contrary to the perceived popular opinion. "Well, there is a reason she is named Stormcrow," Old Man thought to himself, "and it's not just for her affinity with birds, as he looked thoughtfully in the direction of his small black friend. Stormcrow always made a storm with a strong counter-argument to popular opinions at council. This made her a valuable citizen of the City of Trees because she never simply agrees with anything, always pointing out the cracks before the Horde's feet so that the race does not stumble on the cliff that could be forming. He would ensure that she had her seat at the council table. Old Man would have been considered old even by elven standards. He had been old when the Foe-biter Wars began. He still had cherished recipes of Octolly flesh, the cherished foe, whose extinction by the hands of the Fairborn Elves ended 1,000 years' tradition. The extinction of the villainous Octolly had been far from only the Fairborn Elves' fault. Though the last and final blow to the evil race had been dealt by elven hands, the Fayrune had placed the Octolly in a precarious position from their own over-harvesting, not realizing their elven allies intended for the war to ever end. From his earliest memories, Old Man had been fascinated by two things: food and politics. On his 16th cycle, Old Man, then known as Roundbelly, announced his intention to join the Innkeepers Guild because of his innate social empathy and devout loyalty to the customs of the Horde, coupled with his quick and creative grasp of flavor. He was welcomed into the Innkeepers Guild with open arms. After 3 years of culinary and political training, Old Man set out to earn his name. A quest for a young member of the Innkeepers Guild. As a quest for a young member of the Innkeepers Guild, what was required was to quest, traveling to the source of the Minnegichi River and making a canoe to travel down the length of the entire river, stopping at every inn and coven along the length of the entire river, whether human, Fayrune, elf, or other, learning new recipes and tales. End scene. Smalls never thought much of himself. Apart from his unusually small size, his genes held no unique patterns to set him apart, and at the age of 19 cycles, he had yet to claim a name. He had yet to even prepare for his naming quest. Smalls lived in the lower branches of a young tree, a small redwood on the outskirts of Tree City. He rarely ventured to the inn, as he felt he had little to give. Instead, he spent his days harvesting the wild grains and feral vegetables that grew in random rows strewn about by the Foresters Guild. Still, on days he felt he had enough to share, he would bring his harvest to the inn. No matter the amount, Old Man never turned him away hungry. Still, like most Fayrune, Smalls did not wish to tarnish the glory of the Horde with a weak offering, so most nights he stayed away, eating whole wild grains and whatever game birds or squirrels the Foresters Guild had declared open for harvest. Tonight, however, to stay in his home while the Horde gathered for Council of War would tarnish the glory of the Horde even more, even if he were to come empty-handed. Smalls slid his hand up underneath the headboard of his small bonewood bed, pushing aside a hidden panel. The heavy green leaf that Smalls kept tucked inside a black spun spider silk pouch was a rare blend indeed. A fine gift to share with whatever circle would take the young, unnamed council into their midst. When Smalls reached the inn, the walls were filled to overflowing, and several circles had begun to form around the base of the massive tree which held the inn aloft. Fayrune of every size and description could be seen sitting in circles about the base of the tree, smoking the pipes of council. Smalls observed a circle just beginning to form in which his coven brother, who had taken the name Asterix, was just loading a new bowl into his pipe. Smalls excitedly ran over to his coven brother and greeted him in the usual Fayrune custom. End scene. The cat loved everything about his life except his name. He had tried to claim the name Dog. However, the exploits of Petra and his coven brother Coda had made the name impossible to make stick. That dog kid had crawled into the local dog pack, and neither his birth mother nor his prime father had been able to coax him from the pack for long. The rivalry the cat had held had been more with the dog Petra. He considered his pack sister, than with his older coven brother, Coda. Petra had always been the fastest and most intuitive of her birth litter, and therefore that dog kid's first rival. As a Fayrune cub crawling amongst the litter of half-stray dogs, the pup Coda would later name Petra excelled well above the crawling baby. But as that dog kid learned to stand, the tables changed. It was only after that dog kid, with his thumbs, had assumed lead of the pack, that Petra sought company outside of her brothers and sisters in the form of Coda, his older coven brother from a separate mother, and very little father DNA in common. The cat, however, held no ill will towards either. In fact, he and his pack had wept for 7 days when learning of Petra's demise. The cat was guildless as well. His reasons were different. His loyalty was to the pack. Though most of the first generation of his pack brothers and sisters had died of old age, their children from various other packs now followed his lead. The cat had been given his name not because he resembled a cat in any way besides the retractable claws and the first 2 fingers of his right hand. The cat had been born with the nose of the elder race long and pointed like a dog. His sense of smell was strong like that of a dog's, so his place as lead dog was a literal station, and he was often seen being chased by a howling pack of seemingly feral dogs. In reality, he was being followed by his packmates, trailing after their lead dog's more powerful sense of smell. Being raised amongst them, the cat had learned to understand his dog brethren, and by doing so had learned to communicate with his brothers and sisters, as if they had been given the ability to speak. He had learned to understand and even imitate their growls and barks. The more vocal dog members of his pack had begun to imitate some of his words into their barks and howls as well. If Coda was going to war, the cat was damn sure going too. With 3 of his most well-behaved dogs following closely behind him, the cat made his way towards the inn, intending to work his way through the many council circles and as close to the main council table as he could manage to come. He wanted to hear Coda's words as clearly as possible. There's the asterisk again. Coda entered the hall of the inn. A hush came with his entrance and followed him to the main table. Coda entered the hall of the inn. A hush came with his entrance and followed him to the main table, where only a woman with black hair tied into tight braids sat with a small crow on her shoulder. This must be the hero Stormcrow making use of her hero status to claim a spot at the council table, Coda thought to himself, noticing her early arrival at the council table. More would come as the representatives sent from each guild and coven convened at the various council circles gathering outside the inn, and through various sets of debates and group discussions, a representative would be chosen from each circle to progress forward and enter the council set up on the various tables of the inn until representatives were chosen from these circles to speak the will of the horde at the inn's council table. From the number of Fayrune Coda had seen arriving at the inn, it would likely be quite a while before the others' seats at the table were filled. Coda pulled out a chair and took up a seat. Old Man himself stood behind the table, his strong, massive arms crossed proudly over his large, portly belly. As Coda took his seat, a young Fayrune woman of about 20 cycles approached with perfect grace and placed a plate of roast partridge in front of him, while another male Fayrune placed a mug of warmed hard cider to the right side of the plate. Both were apprentice members of the Innkeepers Guild, and clearly promising pupils, as they were directly under Old Man's tutelage. The skin of the partridge was roast to a crunchy, light, golden brown perfection, and the scent coming from the warm, fermented cider enticed Coda's nostrils. But he was more interested in the long, bonewood pipe that sat in the center of the table, and the chance that it held for him to be the first to speak at council. Coda had never been closer than the inner tables during an important discussion at the inn. Tonight, he would be the one to make a call for war to the horde. Many would be told of his words, and those words would decide how many guilds and ungilded Fayrune followed his call. Coda turned his head to meet Stormcrow's gaze. "Greetings, Stormcrow," Coda said. "Greetings to you as well," Stormcrow replied. Greetings to you as well, Coda," Stormcrow replied. Coda was surprised to discover that his reputation had spread so far that his name had reached the ears of heroes. It was forbidden to discuss the matters of council until the table was filled and the council pipe lit, but Coda felt that Stormcrow, knowing his name, boded well for her vote at council. The conversation was cut short by a sudden tinkling of bells, beginning small and becoming louder, intended as a warning for what was to come. Smoke began to leak from a small hole that appeared before one of the chairs. As the smoke poured into the room, the hole became larger, revealing the inside of Jesselwind's study, before the mad old wizard himself stepped through and took a seat at the table. Although he had not made an advance claim for a seat, Old Man did not move to block his actions. Quickfingers had awoken in another type of cage, above ground, still surrounded by melted stone iron bars, but now she was at least allowed to smell the wind and feel the sun's rays. She paced back and forth in front of the gawking, round-eared humans that came to watch her in her cage. She had been trapped in this above-ground feral cage for several days, and though the thought of being confined in this strange place still made the beast inside her stir with rage, it was now boredom that was her biggest danger. Asterix again. Smalls had been very surprised to find himself at the council table. Despite his unnamed status, the questions he raised as to the nature and intentions of the supposedly primitive humans who had kidnapped the Fayrune child Quickfingers had rang true in many an undecided Fayrune's ears, and he found himself advancing quickly through the council circles. Smalls took the last of the 13 seats around the council table, quietly, hungrily, eyeing the roast partridge and warm cider that was placed before him as he took his seat. Smalls reached his hand forward and brought the warm cider to his lips. The warm liquid was a dark amber brown and tasted of cinnamon and slightly bitter fermented apples. The skin of the roasted partridge gave a crisp crunch as he pulled free one of the moist, meaty legs of the small bird. The infamous hero Stormcrow sat directly in front of him. To her left sat another female Fayrune with light blonde hair and pale blue human-type eyes. Smalls would not learn her name or moniker until it was her turn to take the pipe and speak. Next to her sat a male whose hair was woven into a long tail tied with various threads and bits of leather and fur trailing down the center of his back, marking him as War Mage or higher rank of the Sorcerer's Guild. Next to the sorcerer sat the even more infamous wizard, Jeshel Wittershins, drinking his third or fourth cup of warmed cider, his eyes darting every several moments to the already loaded council pipe. Every Fayrune knew both Jeshel Wittershin's face and name. Although Smalls had never seen the wizard in person, he recognized him immediately. After the old wizard, Smalls continued to roll his eyes over many unfamiliar faces, until his eyes met a female Fayrune whom Smalls recognized. The hero Mala was famous throughout the City of Trees as a wise member of the Covenanters Guild, a well-known homemaker, and had been a beloved member of many of the polyamorous Fayrune covens, spreading her wisdom of harmony and communication. It stilled Small's rapidly beating heart when Mala, a previous member of his own birth coven, caught his glance and was greeted with a brief but obvious look of surprised pride at the sight of Smalls seated at the council table. Next to Mala sat the now temporarily famous Coda, who had called this council. Smalls continued to curiously study the other representatives, amazed to find himself seated at the same table. Asterix again, or whatever those are called. Coda brought the pipe to his lips, drawing the pungent, thick smoke deep into his lungs, as the well-known Mala, with her waist-length dark brown hair, held a tiny lit torch made from a hollow tube of bone wood sealed with a mixture of pine sap and high-grade alcohol. After exhaling the strong, tasting, but only slightly intoxicating smoke, Koda licked his lips, too, and swallowed to wet his throat before he began to speak. My name is Koda. I am a guildless member of the Fayrune Horde. His name was greeted with 12 quiet nods, the traditional response. I come before the council today to speak of war. Koda paused momentarily. He had agreed to speak for a call to war to save the child Quickfingers. He was no public speaker, and the wizard Jeshua Wittershins had not made his appearance at the inn until Koda had been seated at the council table. Several days ago, a cub from my coven wandered to the shores of the sacred ocean, where she was taken by force by a group of 7 individuals using both melded stone and hobnailed boots and solid-form wooden rowing boats, indicating that the beings most likely responsible were primitive humans operating with pre-Horde technology. Considering how far the Fayrune Horde and our bonewood technology has spread, this means that the humans responsible would have to come from a very long ways away. Jeshua Wittershins has told me that he knows the location where Quickfingers was taken, and that if we agree to fully engage the humans that are responsible for her capture, he himself will return her to us alive. I am sure he will speak of this himself when it has come his turn to speak. There are many reasons why the Fayrune Horde must go to war. Our enemies on this continent have become few, but I will let others speak on these matters. I ask you to call for war for the sake of a cub who has been taken from us and is clearly being held against her will in a cage somewhere on the other side of the sacred ocean. I ask you to call for war because allowing our young to be held captive insults the glory of the Horde, the pride of the Horde, and the fate of a young girl at stake, and I ask you to call for war. Mala took the pipe next. As a member of the Coveners Guild, I suspect that many at this table expected me to speak against war. How could I call myself a mother if I was not angered when a Fayrune cub has been abducted? My heart cries out to this child known as Quickfingers, and I fear what fate may befall her heart if she is locked in a cage for too long. As my Horde brother Koda has said, our enemies on this continent have become few, and our numbers have grown large, too large. Many of our young have little opportunity to advance within their guilds and truly earn their names. In some areas, sports wars between covens have gone on for far too long. Feelings of resentment and hatred between one coven to another have begun to replace the friendly spirit and local rivalry of lethal competition. These sports wars need to end. A war in a far-off land will give our young a new enemy to feed their hunger, as well as to provide the long journey which many of our young require to claim a name within the various guilds. I call for war because it is needed. I call for war because our cubs need foes on which to sharpen their teeth. Asterisk again. The cat carefully considered the flaws in his argument that had prevented his advancement further towards the final council table as he sat from his perch in the rafters of the council chamber of the inn. He had only reached the 3rd ring of the 3 circles of the table that surrounded the final council table. Although it was considered rude, it was not forbidden to leave his seat. With the cat's sharp eyesight, his perch on the rafter afforded him a better view, and the acoustic spells woven into the bonewood frame and living vines of the inn's ancient walls assured that not only the cat, with his high perch up in the rafters of the council hall, but any beings within the general vicinity of the inn would hear every word spoken by any person holding the ceremonial bonewood pipe. The cat already knew he and his pack of hounds would travel across the sacred ocean with those Fayrune who chose to go to war. His attention was turned back to the council as Jeshua Wittershins blew out 3 enormous, perfect circles of smoke that began to form a spiral as they dissipated into the already smoky atmosphere of the council hall and began to speak. I'm going to pause for just a moment. Jeshua Wittershins' voice is very much a work in progress. I wasn't really quite happy with the way it sounded last time, so it may be a little bit different today. We're going to try. I am the wizard Jessel Wittershins. I now once again swear to the oath that I gave within these council halls many cycles ago. I have said that I will speak with the same honesty as if I were a member of the Fayrune Horde. But it is in that spirit of honesty and the spells woven within these walls that detect dishonesty that I am compelled to tell you tonight that I am not in all truth able to speak as if I am a member of the Horde in my words. Tonight I must speak to you with honesty, but in the words of a potential ally who has already chosen to go to war. A large, gray wrongness of an undead nature has been growing on the eastern shores of the sacred ocean. Your cub Quickfingers has been taken into its grasp and locked in a cage. This leads me to believe she is being held captive for some reason, and is therefore being kept alive. A slight look of unease crossed over many a Fayrune face at the thought of the maddening rage which could overcome any Fayrune faced with captivity. The nature and location of this grey sludge, along with the information I have received from Coda about the tracks left by those who took the child Quickfingers, leads me to believe that there must be a fairly large advanced city of humans that is most likely ruled or dominated by some kind of necromancer that has gained enough knowledge and power to unleash some sort of toxic creature that drains life from the living creatures of the sacred ocean. This grey wrongness that this sorcerer has unleashed taints my dreams and haunts my musings. I fear that this grey wrongness will continue to grow until it has swallowed up the entire sacred ocean, and its questing tendrils begin to drift to the shores of Meadow Valley. I cannot allow this grey wrongness to continue to grow. I shall go to war. I have come to ask you to join me in war. In exchange for your aid, I will offer my magical services in rescuing Quickfingers from her captivity, as well as join you in battle against the foes who has taken her from you. I will not stop until the grey wrongness and necromancer responsible for its creation are scoured from this face of a hybrid. I ask that the Horde aid me in this task. I understand my mustache really itches right there. Stormcrow could hold her tongue no longer, and motioned to be given the pipe next, reaching forward with her left hand and extending her first and middle finger, its retractable claws, the first finger twitching slightly, as if they wished to reveal itself. We're going to start that again. I was too busy trying to do this little hand thing here. Stormcrow could hold her tongue no longer, and motioned to be given the pipe next, reaching forward with her left hand and extending her first and middle finger, her retractable claw and the first finger twitching slightly, as if it wished to reveal itself, as the two fingers curved backwards in a grasping gesture. Taking the pipe, she grasped it tightly, as if she expected the thing to come alive and tried to twist out of her grip. Know this. If we go to war across the waters of the sacred ocean, I, Stormcrow, and Simon will come with you to scout the waves and fight the ships of those enemies that we find on the other side. But we must not be so quick to rush to war in a place so far away. Further even than the reaches of the human commerce and their trading of bone-wood goods have reached. This will not be a journey of days, but months, across open water. Many of you are happy to put your faith in this great wizard, Jessel Wittershins, forgetting the meaning of those words in the old tongues, even as they speak them, and that there are reasons the other races of this land most often call him the Mad Wizard. Even amongst our own tales, there are as many stories of his steps backwards with his magic or when his magic or his mind has lost control and spun untold mayhem, as there are tales of his steps forward where he has come to the aid of the Horde. And you ask me to follow his direction to a point farther than even I have ever sailed before? Risking the lives of hundreds or more to save one cub who should not have wandered off on her own. With the only other promise being of war with men who are so primitive as to wear boots shod in melted stone, and a powerful necromancer that wields grey sludge. Though I do not speak for them, what pillage will the warrior and dastards guild claim from Stone Age humans and zombies. Myself, I have no taste for gray slime. If you go, I will come with you, but I urge you to think carefully before you call for war with the mad wizard Jeshel Wittershins as our guide in the long journey across the sacred ocean. Asterisk again. The cat climbed down from the rafters. He was sure there would be a call for war, and the details would spread throughout the city as soon as the council had finalized them. The cat had work to do before that happened. Coda and Petra had always been his greatest rivals, but with Petra gone, that rivalry would change. This was the cat's chance to further his glory in the eyes of the Horde. For most, discovering what room at the inn Coda had been given for his stay would be a difficult task, as Old Man took great care in protecting the privacy of his guests, especially those guests that might be disturbed by large crowds, such as Coda may have found at his door, were his sleeping space, to become calm in knowledge. The inn, however, had several hounds that called the place home, and through these dogs, the cat's pack had already found Coda's room before the cat had even returned. Soon after, the cat found himself walking down an empty branch hallway, following the slowly wagging tail of a short-legged, round-bellied, dachshund-like dog, as it waddled down the abandoned hallway corridor. No need for stealth, the cat thought to himself. The sound of those speaking at council will drown out any noise I make. The cloth-wrapped bundle he carried under his arm squirmed slightly, as if it was beginning to awaken, just as the small black dog bumped its nose into an off-white bonewood door before leaning up onto its back legs to stand upright in hopes of receiving a reward for having found the correct door. The cat absent-mindedly fished a small piece of venison jerky from his pocket and gave it to the small black and tan dog, who quickly scurried off to enjoy the reward. Just above the top of the door was an enchanted sigil, shaped from the letters of Coda's name, intended to prevent the entrance of anyone besides Coda himself. From the inside of his left sleeve, the Coda retrieved a long piece of metal wire, one of the few melted stone items the cat possessed, the springiness of the steel wire being superior for certain types of work. The cat slid the metal wire into the space between the doorknob and the door frame in one motion. With the skill of a well-practiced hand, and the door popped open. In an inn with a keeper of less skill, perhaps, the cat could have even entered the room now that the door had been opened. It would simply be a matter of deciphering the sigil and tracing its lines in reverse. But the cat was too wary of Old Man's reputation in these matters to even attempt entering the room. Another common theme in Old Man's reputation, however, made him sure that some things would be able to pass by any such barrier unharmed. The cat's pointed teeth revealed themselves in a feral smile as he placed the bundle inside the door, just as its contents were beginning to fully awaken. The cat turned to leave, shutting the door quickly so that the creature did not escape. The cat grinned once again as he strode quickly down the hallway. "This will even things a bit more between us, brother," Cat thought his thoughts at Coda, pretending he was speaking to his older coven brother in his head. "And when we return from our trip across the sacred ocean, it will be I who is called hero and takes a new name." Okay, so that will be it for this portion of the Fayrune saga. That will be picked up in the next series of these tales. Next time, we're going to be reading one poem and a short story, and that will be next Tuesday. In the meantime, we will have another episode of Magical Theory this Saturday. Until then, bright blessings and an interesting fate. This has been Sorcerer Tal.